and thank you so much again for joining me here on Outspoken. I want to talk about Minnesota first. So let me turn to a story in the New York Post, and I like the Post because, yes, it's conservative, but it's also New York, so it's kind of tough and fact-based. And this is titled Three Ringleaders of Anti-ICE Mob Who Stormed Church, including school board member, are arrested, AG Pam Bondi announces. So this is a story from 2 days ago. And of course, it follows the activity last Sunday, so nearly a week ago, in which an anti-ICE mob or crowd stormed a Minnesota church, city's church, during Sunday services, and they did more than kind of peacefully protest. City's church is in St. Paul, Minnesota. They were incredibly scary and disruptive. You could see from the faces of the people sitting in the church, especially the children and teenagers, that they didn't know if these, I wouldn't have known, if a phalanx had come into a synagogue, I wouldn't know if they were armed. And the fact, I've thought about this a lot, very few people got up and left. Now, whether that's that they are very, very committed Christians, and they weren't going to let anyone, chase them out of the Lord's house, or whether it's that they thought that they were being held hostage, which is what the scene looked like. You didn't know if these people were armed and if they were going to line you up and start shooting, right? No, very few people moved from their seats. To me, that says that they were terrified. And again, I would have interpreted that situation as possibly very violent. And I might not have risked getting up and walking out either. So I think it's very dangerous what they did. I believe in First Amendment protected speech, but there are limits, reasonable limits on the First Amendment in the United States of America. And one of the limits is you're not allowed to keep people from exercising their freedom of conscience. You can't keep people from worshiping. It's unconstitutional. And Secretary Kristi Noem said, religious freedom is the bedrock of the United States. There is no First Amendment right to obstruct someone from practicing their religion. And you really need to think about that. Like, it's not First Amendment protected speech before you go into a church to disrupt prayer or a synagogue or a mosque. You can do a quick Google search and find out that the Constitution does not guarantee the right to disrupt worship. It does not allow you to disrupt worship. AG Bondi said that suspects had been taken into custody, and let's see who was taken into custody. We've arrested Nikema Levy Armstrong, said AG Bondi, who allegedly played a key role in organizing the coordinated attack on City's church in St. Paul, Minnesota. Now, she is a Black Lives Matter leader who also serves on a school board. And the second and third people who are arrested include a TikToker on the left and a third alleged ringleader of an anti-ICE mob. They all stormed this church. And of course, television personality Don Lemon was also present. The Department of Homeland Security shared an image of Armstrong being led away in handcuffs on X. This was last Thursday. And we should read her quote. The Black Lives Matter leader and member of the St. Paul Public Schools Board of Education, which means deep in the establishment of St. Paul, Minnesota, not a voiceless person, someone who's very much in charge of huge budgets and curricula and, a huge amount of power. She had earlier compared herself to Jesus, saying she had been inspired by his cleansing of the temple. Well, look what happened to him, but yes. She said, I grew up in the church, and one of the things that I remember about Jesus Christ is that when things weren't going right in the church, he went in and he flipped tables. Allen told TMZ, adding that her mother was a pastor. I want to stop myself right here and say something. she's wrong in that quote. Jesus, and I also love the fact that he was protesting the economy, the corrupt economy of sacrifices, money changers who would exploit people who were coming to pay for doves or livestock to be sacrificed at the temple, where God, asks in Numbers and in Exodus for those kinds of sacrifices to be made at what would become the temple. He overturned the money changers' tables in protest of them exploiting people who are just coming to worship. He didn't do it in the temple. She's not right. The money changers were outside the temple. There was no commercial activity of that kind inside the most sacred place in Judea. She's totally wrong. Yeshua did not go into the temple and disrupt any religious activities inside the temple. That would have been considered, he was Jewish, and that would have been considered by Jews at the time, including by him, not like political protest, but absolute sacrilege. I mean, God is very, very clear. We're reading through the Hebrew Bible right now, chapter after chapter. You can join me in Dr. Naomi Wolf reads the 1560 Geneva Bible if you're interested. And there's a great deal about the Holy of Holies, the tent of meeting, which later became the temple, first and second temples. No way would any Jew enter the temple where God lives, where his very clearly specified ritual observances unfold, and disrupt that. It didn't happen. It wouldn't have happened. It wouldn't be considered, right on protest. It would have been considered absolute blasphemy against God's own word. God did not create the Holy of Holies for it to be disrupted. In fact, over and over again in the Hebrew Bible, people who profane the Holy of Holies gets, destroyed or swallowed up by the earth. No. She's wrong. She's got to go back to her biblical history. They were outside the temple. Like, when you go to a sacred spot or a church in Italy or France, a cathedral in France, there are, people selling tour guide manuals or souvenirs outside the church. They're not inside the church. So when Jesus overturned the tables of the money changers, it's like that. It's like souvenir sellers outside of a holy place. Good God, this woman's ignorant. All right, let's go back to it. But that's a big mistake she made if it led her to think it was okay to go right into the church. Wow, it wasn't a church, it was a synagogue. She's quite ignorant. And let's see, and A.G. Bondi said on X, listen loud and clear, we do not tolerate attacks on places of worship. A spokesperson for the city's Board of Ed told the Post that the district, quote, has been made aware of this incident and is following all applicable policies and procedures, but, quote, does not comment on pending legal matters. It was also announced that an anti-ICE influencer, William Kelly, the bearded guy, had also been arrested for his involvement in the church riots. He uses the handle DeWoke Farmer on TikTok and was pictured on X being taken into custody while wearing a beanie hat emblazoned with the words F Trump by no. And in a TikTok video shared Monday, Kelly had goaded Bondi, am I pronouncing her name correctly? Bondi, to arrest him. Pam Bond, it's Bondi. You want to come and arrest me, he said. You want to come and give me charges? So be it. And for all the people giving me death threats, threatening my life, kill me. Go ahead, kill me, he ranted in the garbled video. Armstrong, Allen, and Kelly are being charged with, quote, conspiracy against rights, which makes it a federal crime to intimidate someone in the free exercise of their rights as secured in the U.S. Constitution. A.G. Bondi's announcement was met with dozens of responses calling for the arrest of frequently fired independent news commentator Lemon, the New York Post is so snarky, who was allegedly among there is a worldwide rush for gold right now and precious metals. China is buying gold. There are rumors that the Federal Reserve will be using gold to pay off federal debt, or the federal government will be using gold to pay off federal debt. Famous investors are buying gold. And there's a movement away from the dollar worldwide. And you can see that there are warning signs in the economy that appeared before the Great Depression in 2008 that are flashing red right now. So in all this instability, it is a very good idea to protect your savings, to protect your IRA by diversifying into precious metals, especially gold. There are a lot of gold companies out there. Not all of them are kosher. Not all of them are responsible businesses. American Alternative Assets really is. And we're very, very proud to have them as a sponsor. We're very picky about our sponsors, and we only accept sponsors who have products that we either use or invest in ourselves. So I really encourage you to go to cloutgold.com, cloutgold.com, and get a free report explaining to you what the risks are of not diversifying into gold and silver. And I just want to note that when Brian and I started talking about investing in gold 5 years ago, when it first became clear that you could do that easily, if we'd put in $1,000 then, it would be 5,000 now. If we'd put in 10,000 then, it would be 50,000 now, and so on. So obviously you can't predict everything about the future, but gold there's a limited amount of it on the planet. And in a time when you can have your assets switched off, if they're digital, like the truckers in Canada had their bank account switched off. People in Spain are having their bank account switched off. All of China is now on a social credit system. Your assets can be switched off. And Europe is pushing for central bank digital currency. Now is the time to diversify into gold. Among the rabble who stormed the church. Well, he was there. It was on his show. He reported on it in a very aggressive way, very confrontational to the worshipers. I would say not good journalism, because his point of view was so skewed, so one-sided. Thank you, A.G. Bondi. Let us know when Don Lemon is arrested as well. One ex-user wrote, quote, Christophobia has no place in Minnesota or anywhere, added a second. So that was from 2 days ago. And there has been, I would say civil war in Minnesota, and since then and before then. Of course, Renee Good was shot and killed by ICE. I believe there's been another ICE-related death, shooting. I haven't had a chance to look into it. And I've been predicting for several years, those of you who follow me on Bannon, or Alex Jones for that matter, know this, that the global elites and now the Red Green Alliance want civil war. They want civil war in Britain. That's why they're bringing immigrants, illegal immigrants, boat migrants, to army encampments all over quiet country towns in Britain. And of course, the protests are becoming more and more, I don't want to say violent, but angry. And of course, in Britain, they don't have a Second Amendment. So there's not much that British people can do. Shows you why the Second Amendment is just as important as the First Amendment. I'm a nonviolent person, but if the state starts to subvert and invade your country, you do need some way to fight back. But they want that conflict. The elites, Starmer, the PM of the UK, wants that conflict, in my belief. And by the same token, I really think Democrats especially want battle in blue cities. There's been so much documentation that China and Qatar are pumping money into blue cities and blue states, and and that basically there's a goal to turn the leadership, red and green, right? Like the communist agenda, communist kind of destruction of individual rights, coupled with imposing kind of, and I didn't used to believe this, I've become persuaded recently, Islamist, no disrespect to individual Muslims, many wonderful, beautiful Muslims around the world, not being, Islamophobic, but there's clearly a plan. You can see it unfolding in places like Texas, certainly in Minnesota with Somalia, certainly in Maine, of kind of establishing, doing the same thing to America as they're doing to the UK and Ireland, the Republic of Ireland, establishing kind of an Islamic hegemony. And why Islam and why people from sub-Saharan Africa very often, and often from failed states like Somalia, I think it's because they're easier to control, or that because they don't have the same, this is not racist, it's not ethnocentric, it's just a fact. People in Somalia or Afghanistan, or rural Pakistan, don't have the same culture of individual rights, rights for women, rights for gay people, that we have in the United States. They don't. They do what the imams tell them to do. If they don't do what the imams tell them to do, they face horrible, horrible repercussions, including violence, and in the case of women, sometimes death, and in the case of gay people, violence and sometimes death. So if you're going to replace Americans and British people who have this notion of individual rights, constitutional rights, parliamentary rights, that's a difficult population to control. If you want a population that you can control, import people who are already controlled by their hierarchy. That's my analysis. And so I think that the communists who have established beachheads in places like Minnesota and Washington State and New York State, where I am, Boston, right, places across the country, it's right on target. It's right on schedule. And that's why if you follow me on X, you'll see that I often write the word memo when something is unfolding that's so clearly part of like a white paper, right? This is so clearly coordinated at the highest levels. So for instance, there's a two-tier justice system that has unfolded in Europe. That's part of the memo. There's Muslims going into churches and or in a nativity scene, beheading the baby Jesus statue, or, breaking the Mary statue, or spitting on the cross, the crucifix, defacing religious symbols. That's part of the memo. There's a systematic erasure. They're, being given information in Ireland that they can't have St. Bridget's Day, or they can't have St. Patrick's Day because there's no money for it. Erasing cultural landmarks in Europe. That's part of a memo. It's happened in America as well. Charlottesville, Virginia. I always get Charlotte and Charlottesville mixed up. They had an avenue of Civil War hero statues. You might hate the South in the Civil War. You may hate the rebels and think they were wrong, but it's part of our history. You can have a plaque explaining if you think they were wrong, but you don't tear down the statues. And that's exactly what happened in Charlottesville, Virginia. To correct me in the comments if I have that wrong. So there is constant violence in Minnesota, Minneapolis, St. Paul. There's also, even as, and I think these are related, even as there's escalating violence in Minneapolis and St. Paul, between violent, rabid anti-ICE protesters and ICE, things are escalating in a way that is bound to create violence. For instance, the training of the protesters, which is highly organized, is escalating to say things like use whistles. Now, that level of noise, the human brain can't tolerate, or scream, screaming, constant screaming. I mean, this is a form of torture. I researched torture when I looked at Guantanamo in the Bush 2 era, and that level of noise will drive humans crazy. They cannot sustain being exposed to that level of noise. So there's, and then confrontational tactics like, blocking vehicles, the way that poor Renee Good, a very regrettable, very avoidable death if she hadn't done things that are incredibly self-destructive and incendiary. May she rest in peace. It is very, very, very dangerous to use your car to block ICE vehicles or any vehicles. And everyone should know that. Why? Because ambulances have to get through, firefighters have to get through. What if an elderly person is having a heart attack, right? It's extremely dangerous. So that escalation is intentional. And you've got people like Tim Walz of Minnesota, governor of Minnesota, former running mate with Kamala Harris, incredibly enough, basically urging people to put their bodies on the line. And when you have leaders saying those things to protesters, you have crazy people or, fake people. I kind of think the bearded guy is not real. He strikes me as not real. I mean, not a real person. I don't mean not a real person like a hologram. I mean like a provocateur, right? Who doesn't always look like that and may have a very different past. But when the elites say, put your bodies on the line, scream at them, block them with your vehicles, that's not what leaders do when they are trying to de-escalate, right? That's not what leaders do when they're trying to keep their community together and keep them safe. Let's talk about this. So, and I know this from having been in conflict areas many times throughout my life. When there's civil unrest of that kind, a real leader who doesn't want civil war and doesn't want civil unrest, if Tim Walz really wanted to end the violence in Minnesota, he would say something like, and he would go himself, right, and put his own body on the line, but he would say something like, hey, everyone, I know you're very upset about federal authorities operating in Minneapolis and St. Paul. We're going to stand on the sidewalks. We're going to protest peacefully. We're going to use our First Amendment rights. We're not going to block the streets. We're not going to escalate. We're not going to resist arrest, because resisting arrest is an offense, in policing. And we are going to make our voices heard, support our neighbors if that's what people want to do, support their, illegally present neighbors, that they have that right. I don't agree with it, but they have that right. And we are going to, show up and obey the law. He's not saying that, and by the way, if you don't agree with what ICE is doing, and from my understanding, they have a blanket warrant, they, have the legal right to police in the way that they're policing. That's my fullest understanding. It's scary to watch, but I do not believe they're violating the Fourth Amendment. It is my understanding that they have a blanket warrant when they are, arresting people who they have cause to arrest. You can change, you have a voice, and you can tell your representatives that you want to change the law related to ICE, and you can change the law related to ICE, or you can, in the midterms vote to hobble President Trump so that, he can't keep deploying ICE. There are any numbers of things you can do in a democracy. But I do recognize that the people that ICE is arresting are people they have reason to believe are here illegally or have committed crimes. And even if they haven't committed additional crimes, if they are here illegally, that is a crime. And I've said this a million times in public, but I'll say it again. And I consider myself a liberal, a classical 19th century liberal. But for real, if I went to Yemen or, Gaza or Afghanistan or, Morocco or Colombia or Argentina or any real sovereign nation anywhere in the world illegally, and I crossed the border unlawfully, and I was there without a visa or citizenship, let alone, taking benefits or sending my children to school, unlawfully, getting medical care unlawfully, I would thoroughly recognize that I'd put myself in a very, very dangerous situation. In Turkey, I would thoroughly recognize that at any moment I could be arrested and taken, deported or incarcerated in really horrible conditions because I'm breaking the law. I'm there illegally. It's not trivial to cross a border unlawfully. It is, what's a border? A border is a real thing that protects a country, and above all, it's a national security issue. If we don't know who's coming into our country, we cannot protect our country. And I speak as someone who has been in many wars. Very often some of the most horrible wars come about because of border disputes, because the borders aren't clear. Good fences make good neighbors. Knowing where your border is and protecting your border is fundamental to peace and security in a country. A. B, if you have a democracy, you need a border because a democracy requires citizens. If you want to destroy a democracy, let in millions of people who are not citizens, and then you can't run your country as citizens. You can't set an agenda as citizens. You can't hold anyone accountable as citizens, and you have no voice. And it turns into an authoritarian state in short years, like England and Australia are doing before our eyes, Canada is doing. So yes, I believe in borders, and yes, I believe in enforcing the law. And I'm also going to say, if you don't enforce immigration law and you don't think it's serious that people are breaking immigration law, which is, is it in our like code, right? It's not nothing to cross into a country illegally. It violates very specific laws that we passed. You really have to ask yourself, are you a patriot? Because if you don't care about US law, about immigration, how can you claim to care about US law about, rape or marital rape or robbery or arson or, child abuse or trafficking in humans? I mean, what laws do we observe? Just the ones we want? That's not how a society made up of laws works. Now, I'm going to turn to Joseph Louis Johnston. And I wish that I could see your face because sometimes I get comments and it feels astroturfed or trollish. So I'm going to hold up this book again because you're so wrong, Mr. Johnston. This book is In the Garden of the Beasts, and it's about the Gestapo. It's about the actual Gestapo, okay? And I will say again, I am the granddaughter of two people who lost 8 siblings to murder in the Holocaust. I'm the granddaughter. I have 8 great uncles and great aunts and their families, including children, whom I will never know because they were murdered by the Gestapo and later the Nazi regime. Now, so I've given a lot of thought to reading the history of Nazism, and ICE is not the Gestapo. And people who keep saying, oh, the Gestapo, I can't believe you support Trump's Gestapo, are really, like, as a Jew, that's so offensive. That's so offensive. Read a history book. I'm sorry to lose my temper. Read a history book of the Gestapo, because the Gestapo were overseen by no laws, No laws. In Night of the Long Knives, you know, the Nazis just killed their own people. They just murdered, dozens of their own people. The Gestapo for 6 months in 1931, 32, 33, over the course of that period of time, but specifically in the course of 6 months right before 1933, they rounded up, dragged citizens to not to prisons, not to deportation, to their home countries in nice planes. They took them to basements, makeshift concentration camps, hidden away places, totally outside the rule of law, where they beat them or killed them. So, this Ambassador Dodd, who represented the United States, when the Gestapo was doing this, the real Gestapo, describes American citizens who happened to be in Germany in the wrong place, the wrong time, Jews, dragged to basements, and they came to the American embassy after 4 days in bed because the Gestapo had beaten them so badly that their flesh was pulped. Okay, up and down, like from the neck to the ankles, their flesh was a bloody mass of pulp. Or people just were disappeared and murdered, and their possessions were confiscated. There was there was judge, jury, and executioner. There was no judicial process at all. There was no legal process at all. And when people complained to Adolf Hitler about the fact that people were being dragged off and murdered or beaten to bloody pulps, hospitalized, in basements with no rule of law, no repercussions by these anonymous thugs, the Gestapo, what he said was, I am the judge and the jury. That's what he said. So no, ICE is operating under the aegis of American law. And when there is any doubt about it, like the death of Renee Good, it's going to be investigated by representatives of our legal system. And the guy will have a lawyer, and Renee Good's wife will have a lawyer. And the state will probably have a lawyer, and a judge will be involved. And the people who are identified as being in this country illegally are being treated according to US law, and they're being sent home according to US law. And they're here not according to US law. So no, it's not the effing Gestapo. They are not the Gestapo. If they were the Gestapo, we wouldn't even be having this conversation, because none of us would want to criticize anything Trump is doing. Just like by 1932, no one wanted to criticize Hitler, even though he wasn't even yet fully in power, because he had the Gestapo. If they were the Gestapo, we wouldn't be criticizing Trump or ICE, because they would drag us into a basement somewhere and murder us. So no, they are not the Gestapo. And stop being offensive and ahistorical and ignorant in drawing that comparison. All right, I've said that. Okay, now you're just trolling me. I'll move on. Let's see. Talk to the people in Minnesota who were there, says Valerie Wilson Macroval. From what I've heard, there are citizens and Native Americans who are getting arrested. Have to talk to people who are there on the ground. I agree with you. And as a reporter, that's what I support, and everyone should be doing that. Are they being released? Are they being arrested and released? That's the question. And if you can post, please, some evidence that they are not being released, then in that case, ICE would be like the Gestapo. But I have not seen evidence of that. I think maybe you've got it, in which case, please show me. But I think that inevitably, in an operation like this, there are going to be the wrong people arrested, and that's why we have the law. I've been arrested and released twice. There's a process that the police are not going to get it right every time, and ICE federal agents are not going to get it right every time. Certainly not under the conditions that they're being subjected to in their work by the citizens of Minnesota, who are screaming at them and harassing them and blocking their egress and making it very difficult for them to operate peaceably. But I'm going to say something else. You can be as mad at me as you want. I live, part-time in a very low-income neighborhood in Brooklyn. Those kids don't get enough. They don't get good enough education. Half the students in New York cannot third grade to eighth grade cannot read at grade level. They don't get decent food. They don't, if they're living in public housing, they don't have safe, clean housing. Crime is out of control. Uh, it's scary to be a kid walking home from school. There's not enough. We're the richest, or one of the richest countries on earth, and we may have 30 million people here whose kids are in our kids' schools and who are, as we saw in the Somali fraud in Minnesota, who are, tapping our taxpayer dollars at the rate of billions in fraud. I mean, the level of fraud that's being exposed in Minnesota is absolutely staggering. And you can assume that it's systemic. You can assume that this is what's been fueling the Democratic Party, and maybe the Republicans too, for many, many years, because it's not their policies that are keeping them in power. You can assume that that's why Tim Walz was tapped, the most uncharismatic politician in America, to be Kamala Harris's running mate, that he had access to the fraud, the billions of taxpayer dollars that are being laundered through fraud. And those American kids in Brooklyn, they need to come first. I'm sorry. We have no obligation to feed and house and give medical care to other nations' people. And it's not good for other nations either. If your nation sucks, stay and make it better, like we made our nation better, and like the people of Western Europe made their nations better. You have no right to, I have no right to go to Yemen or Afghanistan or Morocco and put my family on the public charge and take money essentially from the children of Yemen or Afghanistan or Morocco. I have no right to do that. And I can't believe the brainwashing that has led to people in Minnesota, or people, protesting in City's Church, or protesting in Union Square, I think, in New York. Why are you protesting federal agents who are trying to enforce our actual laws and trying to put American children first and American families first? I don't get it. I don't get it. My dad lost a father for 7 years. He didn't have his father because my grandfather came to this country from Romania legally. And there was a quota, to how many Romanian Jews they would let in at one time. And so my grandfather had to work for 7 years in order to get the permission from the United States government to bring his wife and 2 sons to America. So my dad didn't have a father for the first 7 years of his life. And his brother didn't have a father for 7 years. And his mom didn't have a husband for 7 years. That's what they did. And they blessed this country, and they loved this country, and they worked hard their whole lives. They made it better, and they went from being, illiterate peasants in their own generation to raising, pharmacists and professors and jewelers, and, and then grandchildren who are scientists and professors and writers. And why is that not okay? That seems to me to be okay. Why should my grandfather's sacrifice and your grandparents' sacrifice, whoever you are, if you're American, or if you're American and descended from enslaved people, that 400-year sacrifice, why should that be made a mockery of by people who are not American and who have completely bypassed the legal ways of coming to this country? It just insults all the immigrants to this country who have done it the right way, who've done it legally, and it just positions Americans as if they are nothing but objects to be exploited. Billions in fraud. Sure, just take their taxpayer money, drive their country into the ground, because that's what's happening with our deficits, because of all this fraud and because of the healthcare, housing, and education of 30 million people who are not American citizens. So I make no apologies for putting American citizens first. All right, there's so many comments. We're coming to the end of our second hour, believe it or not. Okay, so Mr. Johnston says he's not trolling you. You can't believe I'm a Trump apologist now. He closed the border, good, but he's a nut job. I mean, respectfully, do better than that. I'm from the left, but I'm tired as an intellectual of the left or whoever you are, right? The never Trumpers, um, saying, "Oh, they're crazy, they're crazy." Maybe he's a nut job. Give me evidence. But I kind of like that he brought about peace in Gaza and saved, thousands of people from being killed on both sides. I like that he is putting Americans first. I like that he's closing the border. I like that he's taking the rule of law seriously. I really like that he's getting men out of women's sports and boys out of girls' sports so that they can compete, um, and, fairly. And, he's not perfect, God knows, and there's corruption on both sides. But look, look what we had before him. Biden would have put us all in concentration camps. Biden forcibly injected people who begged not to have a poison injected into their veins, and now they're sterile or disabled or dead. Um, and also Biden was barely compos mentis. Who was actually running the United States? We don't know. Like, we don't know who was running the United States. That is not a governing by the rule of law. We didn't elect whoever was running the United States. Okay, this is good. Thank you. That's very helpful. So Valerie Wilson Macro Val says, this is Linda Black Elf. I think you mean Black Elk. I it's very, very cute otherwise, but I'm guessing it's Black Elk, who lives in Minnesota. You can check her out. She's been posting about what's happening to the natives there. I will absolutely take a look. Everyone should take a look. And for sure, the escalation of militant or militarized policing always carries the risk uh, of tyranny. Always, we have to be really, really careful about it. And if that's happening, it shouldn't happen. So I'll look into it and I'll report on it. And Barry Atkinson, another good friend of ours, says every country in the world has visa requirements: visitor, student, work, resident, etc. So true. And Maria says, we wouldn't have a country right now if the Democrats were in control. We'd be heading toward being the next Venezuela. Absolutely. And Emerald Robinson did some really good reporting showing that maybe we were the next Venezuela before this last election, because our voting machines are apparently made in Venezuela and routed on Chinese servers. So the coup may have already happened. So I see it as a counter. I see the Trump administration, with all their flaws, engaging in a counter revolution to try to regain the United States. And yeah, it's a long, crazy journey I've been on, lifelong Democrat, but here we are. That's my best assessment. You guys, we've run out of time. I just want to say a word or two, because I promised I would, about Davos. If you go and look for the president's speech at Davos, Switzerland, of course, the World Economic Forum, it's really interesting what you see. All the legacy media coverage that you see is, it says how crazy he is and what a circus it is and how racist he is, but they don't quote his speech. You have to go all the way to the White House, whitehouse.gov, to actually see quotes and clips of his speech. So there are a lot of, I encourage you to look at it, because you're not going to get it from the legacy media. But the other thing is, look at it because you can see that I think if you hate Trump, I'd like to talk to you after you look at this speech and this summary of this speech. A lot of it is about homeownership, and he's done some really radical things to allow ordinary people to own their own homes again, or buy their own homes again, which has been out of reach for most people. The average age of first-time home ownership is 59 years old, I just read, so it's shocking. So he signed an executive order banning large investors, institutional investors, from buying single-family homes. And he's calling for Congress to turn that into a permanent law. So that's really a blow against BlackRock and Vanguard, which were buying up single-family homes. People would have the horrible experience of making an offer on a home, that they could barely afford, and then watching some anonymous person outbid them, by many factors of zeros. And That's BlackRock turning us into a nation of renters. So that's dramatic. He's fighting for credit card companies to not charge more, to cap interest rates at 28%. The profit margin is now exceeding 50%. That's a very pro people policy. And he also did something very clever. He's talking about, I don't think it's past it, but he's talking about letting people take money out of their retirement accounts without penalty in order to make a down payment on a home. So he's really focused on home ownership. He talked about the economy, oil production, but he also said some very profound things to Europe. He said basically you're going to destroy yourselves through mass migration from culturally incompatible countries. And he says specifically about Minnesota, the situation in Minnesota reminds us that the West cannot import foreign, part of it is blocked, immigrants from societies which have failed ever to build, foreign immigrants which have, I can't read all of this clearly, people from societies which have failed to ever build a successful society of their own. And then he talks about Western culture, and he says the explosion of peace and prosperity that built the West did not come from our policies. It ultimately came from our very special culture. And that America and Europe have this in common. We have to defend that culture and to rediscover the spirit that lifted the West from the depths of the dark ages to the heights of human achievement. So you're never going to see this in the legacy media, but this is what he actually said. And I, for one, agree with him. You know, it is the people of the West and the very unusual culture of the West, very high trust society that has taken, millennia to evolve to where it is now. I mean, 1,000 years ago in the West, we were a feudal society in which, peasants had no rights. And that was true in Russia till, 1917. And, we've been through a lot, but many people in the West fought to get to where we were 5 years ago, which is a prosperous, high trust set of cultures with shared ethical values, Judeo-Christian values, I'll just say it. Respect for the individual, even if, honored in the breach, as they say, rather than perfectly. Those were our values. You're not supposed to rape your wife. You're not supposed to beat your children to a bloody pulp. You're not supposed to sell them. You're not supposed to molest them. Gay people are equal. People of different races are equal. These are beautiful values. And there's nothing wrong with recognizing that this is precious. And if you don't agree that it's precious, you can go to the many, many, many countries that share your values. If what you want is Sharia law, or what you want is a country where, gay people are penalized. But that's not the West. And I think he's right to stand up for the West. I think he's right to identify that Christians are being targeted around the world. It's true. I think it took a lot of courage. And also, he doesn't have to. He's 78 years old. He's really rich. He doesn't have to spend these years trying to extricate us, which happened, from nefarious global organizations like the World Health Organization, which wanted to make all our decisions for everyone's health above the level of our national laws. Remember, like, if you care about the rule of law, that's really good that he left the World Health Organization. And he's clearly trying to kind of do an end run around the UN. Someone else pointed this out. I think it's a really good point. By convening this board of peace with all of these people who used to be, all these nations who used to be like at daggers drawn with each other, like Arab states and Israel, for instance. But he's convening them to build Gaza. We'll see how it goes. I don't know how the people of Gaza feel about it, but he's clearly creating an alternative power block to the UN. And I think the UN is a nefarious organization founded with beautiful intentions. The League of Nations was its forerunner, convened by Woodrow Wilson. But it's corrupt and evil and does nothing good. And I think we've seen with the European Union and the massive resistance mobilizing against the European Union in Europe, that these multinational or global entities that are not accountable to anyone and not elected by anyone have to go. They're nothing but vectors of tyranny. And I do believe in sovereignty, and I do believe in the ideals of 19th century liberal democracies. And President Trump and J.D. Vance are speaking up for them. I don't mean liberal, like partisan liberal. I mean liberal democracy where all citizens have equal rights. And I think that this is the existential fight of the West right now and of the world right now, because it's not just the West that wants Western values. People all over the world, all over the Muslim world, all over the African world, the Asian world, they want human rights. They want equality for women. They want, if they're gay, they want to not be imprisoned or beaten or tortured as they are in Egypt for being gay. People want one man, one woman, one vote. They want peace and dignity. And so we should not be shy to stand up to protect our cultures in the West that had those. And we should also, I think, applaud President Trump for wanting to support those values around the world. Obviously, ideally without getting into wars around the world, but he is ending a lot of wars. People never give him credit as a peacemaker. But when you actually look at his record of ending wars, that's why the deep state hates him so much, because he's not a warmonger like Hillary Clinton. He's not a warmonger like Joe Biden, who just shoveled money into the maw of war after war after war. All right, that's what I had to say to you guys today. We've run out of time. I'm going to thank our sponsors again, once again. Gold is headed to, some people believe, $10,000 an ounce or more. Goldman Sachs, again, says gold will surge 20%. JP Morgan says 25%. And it's possible that the US government could deliberately raise gold's official price in order to have it be part of paying off the national debt. What is it that the wealthiest players in the world are aware of that we're not aware of? Well, you can see now exactly what they're seeing for free. Our friends at American Alternative Assets, a wonderful company, our sponsors, just released a powerful new report, The Surprising Case for $10,000 Gold. This report breaks down the hidden signals, the central bank gold buying spree, and the way that smart Americans are protecting their retirements right now by buying gold. Go to cloutgold.com to download this report for free. Really take a look at it, or call 855-803-GOLD. That's cloutgold.com, 855-803-GOLD. There are a lot of sketchy precious metals companies out there. We're really proud to work with American Alternative Assets because they are not, they are very respected in their field. Wonderful reviews, wonderful people on the other end of the line who will answer your questions. There's no such thing as a stupid question. At American Alternative Assets, I've asked many of them myself. And as I often say, and I said an hour ago, but it bears repeating, Brian and I first started talking about buying gold when we figured out we could 5 years ago. And if we had done so, our investment then would have nearly quintupled. It would have gone up nearly 5x. So don't make the mistake that we made. We've remedied that mistake, but go ahead and call American Alternative Assets. That's 855-803-GOLD. And you can also go to cloutgold.com. Don't wait. Take care of your future. You guys be safe, stay warm, get your candles and your lanterns and if you can, your wood stove and your wood and your kindling. We'll make it through the snowfall, and I will see you on the other side of the big storm of 2026. Be well. I love you all. Please, if you found this useful, it doesn't happen by itself. There's a team, and we've got to pay our bills. This is Loki, who always likes to be near me when he's wearing such a cute sweater. Can I hold you up, honey, so they can see your adorable sweater? Oh, he's shy, but you've got to look at how cute this sweater is. Oh, he's making little like purring sounds. He gets so sleepy when we've got a snow day. Okay, that's enough kissing. But it doesn't happen by itself. we need your help. I've just shared incredible information with you about how to stay healthy and safe in cold and flu season. And I've done an analysis that you're not going to get in the Washington Post or the New York Times. Independent journalism, beholden to no one, but we need your help and your support. So go to Substack and become a subscriber, please, for $7 a month to my Substack Outspoken. And you also get a monthly Drinks with Naomi when you do that. If you become a founding member, I will send you 2 signed books. And then you can go, I love you too, Loki. Then you can go over to dailyclout.io and you can make a one-time donation or subscribe there. Independent journalism you won't get anywhere else. Plus, incredible tools like BillCam and Legisector and communities that let you follow what's going on in your industry legislatively, or just follow bills that you care about and share them and take action on them and drive your own democracy. Love you guys. Support us. We need your help, and we will carry on. I'll see you in a day or so. Bye-bye.